It was October the 11th, 2025, when the world lost Diane Keaton. Not just an actress, but a spirit, a woman who turned awkwardness into art, who taught generations that strength could live inside vulnerability. News of her passing spread across the morning airwaves like a chill. Headlines mourned a legend. Fans gathered outside her Los Angeles home, clutching flowers and old photographs, some smiling through tears, others whispering, "She never changed." Across Hollywood, something shifted that day. Not just grief, but the quiet realization that a certain kind of magic was gone, the kind that made the ordinary feel extraordinary. Diane Keaton had been many things: an Oscar winner, a muse, a director, a woman who refused to be boxed in by beauty or by men. She lived life on her own terms, open, bold, and often misunderstood. But as tributes filled television screens and memories flooded social media, another story began to take shape. One that didn't make the headlines. A story of broken bonds, unspoken regrets, and the complicated beauty of a woman who lived without apology. And soon, when Hollywood gathers to say its final goodbye, there will be faces missing. Not out of malice, but because some wounds never healed. Some friendships ended in silence. Some memories still carry too much weight. These are the 5 actors we won't be seeing at Diane Keaton's funeral, and the reasons their absence will haunt Hollywood forever. Number 1. Woody Allen. Of all the names linked to Diane Keaton, none is more inseparable than Woody Allen's. For decades they were two sides of the same cinematic coin, his neurotic genius and her fearless warmth, creating a rhythm that defined an era. Together they made Annie Hall, Manhattan, Love and Death, films that didn't just entertain but changed what love stories could sound like. Their chemistry was electric, their timing effortless. In interviews, Diane once said she never stopped finding him fascinating, no matter how much time passed, and for years, the world assumed that whatever had bound them on screen had never truly disappeared off it. But time changes everything, even the bonds that once seemed unbreakable. As the years passed, their friendship grew quieter. Woody's life took a darker turn. Controversy, estrangement, public judgment, and Diane found herself caught between loyalty and disillusionment. She defended him at times, refused to denounce him publicly, and that choice drew both admiration and anger. For some, it looked like strength, a friend refusing to follow the mob. For others, it looked like denial. Either way, it placed her in a lonely space between eras, an artist from another time trying to navigate a world that no longer played by the same rules. In later years, their contact became almost non-existent. Those who knew Diane privately said she still spoke of him fondly, but carefully, as if choosing every word mattered. She didn't like confrontation, and she hated public judgment. Yet those who understood her best sensed an ache there, a wistfulness for the years when they were young and hungry, making art that felt like truth before life became too complicated to imitate. When Woody Allen's name surfaces now, it carries decades of division. Some still call him a genius, others will never forgive him. And that is why, when Diane's funeral finally arrives, few expect him to walk through those chapel doors. Even if he wanted to, he may not be welcome. The world that once celebrated their partnership has moved on, and their shared history, so full of light and laughter, has become impossible to separate from the shadows that followed. For Diane, their relationship was never just about love or friendship. It was about art, identity, and the kind of connection that defies easy explanation. She was his muse, yes, but she was also his mirror, the only person who could soften his sharp edges and challenge his cynicism without losing herself in the process. Yet in the end, the same independence that made her unforgettable also kept her apart. Diane lived by her own compass, and in the final chapters of her life, that compass pointed her somewhere far from Woody's world. When her memorial is held, his absence will say what words cannot. It will represent the quiet ending of one of Hollywood's most iconic partnerships, not with anger, not with resentment, but with the sad understanding that time and truth eventually draw their own boundaries. Because for all they gave each other, they also lost something that no film, no memory, no award could ever restore: the simplicity of two artists believing that art alone could save them. Number 2. Al Pacino. If Woody Allen represented Diane Keaton's artistic mind, then Al Pacino represented her heart. The two met in the early 1970s while working on The Godfather, a film that would define both of their lives. Diane was still an emerging actress then, wide-eyed and determined, while Pacino was the intense newcomer with a quiet fire behind his eyes. Together they created one of cinema's most haunting love stories, Michael and Kay Corleone, a relationship built on loyalty, betrayal and longing. But behind the camera, another connection began to form. It was softer, more real, and for a while it consumed them both. Their romance was never simple. Diane adored Al's depth, his mystery, his relentless pursuit of perfection. He admired her humor, her honesty, and the strange way she could make even silence feel safe. Yet as the years passed, their love started to mirror the distance between their characters on screen. Al was restless, lost in the craft, unwilling to settle. Diane wanted roots, something stable, something human. After years of chasing roles that demanded she disappear into someone else, they would come together, then drift apart, like tides that never quite aligned. By the late 80s, it was clear that whatever chance they'd had at forever had faded. Diane would later admit that she'd loved him deeply, but that his world was too dark for hers. She longed for laughter, for a home filled with noise and light. However, the solitary artist feared that kind of intimacy. Even after their romance ended, they remained bound by something invisible: respect, nostalgia, and the kind of understanding that doesn't vanish just because love does. When the two reunited years later at industry events, the chemistry was still there. Cameras captured small smiles, shared glances, and the ease of two people who had lived too much life to hold grudges. Yet beneath the surface, there was a melancholy that neither could disguise. Diane's warmth had turned into acceptance. Al's silence had become his way of saying what words could not. They had outgrown the fantasy, but not the memory. Now, as the film world prepares to mourn Diane Keaton, many wonder whether Al Pacino will make an appearance at her funeral. It's possible, but unlikely. The two had grown distant in recent years, their lives pulled in different directions. Al's health, his age, and his complicated relationship with the public eye make him an unpredictable figure. But even beyond logistics, there's a deeper reason his presence would be uncertain. Some say he wouldn't want to face what her loss represents, the final chapter of an era he's never quite been ready to close. Their story is more than a love affair. It's a reflection of two souls who shaped each other's legacies, only to discover that timing is the cruelest part of fate. Diane once said she believed everyone she'd ever loved left a mark that never faded. If that's true, then Al Pacino's name is etched somewhere deep within hers. But whether or not he stands beside her casket one day, the truth is this: he doesn't need to. Their goodbye happened long ago, in the quiet spaces between their words, in the final scene of The Godfather Part 3, when Michael and Kay shared one last look that said everything they couldn't. And that, perhaps, was their real farewell. Number 3. Warren Beatty. There was a time when Diane Keaton and Warren Beatty were the golden couple of Hollywood, two icons at the peak of their power, drawn together not by need, but by recognition. Each saw in the other something they understood: ambition wrapped in vulnerability, confidence masking chaos. When they met in the late 1970s during the making of Reds, Warren was already a legend, and Diane was still proving she could stand on her own outside the shadow of Woody Allen. Reds would become their masterpiece, an epic of passion, politics, and human frailty, and their off-screen relationship burned just as brightly. But brightness can be blinding. Those who were there remember the energy between them. Thrilling, competitive, magnetic. Warren admired Diane's intelligence and unconventional beauty, her ability to challenge him without surrender. Diane, in turn, was fascinated by his charm, that elusive combination of mischief and melancholy that made him irresistible to nearly everyone who crossed his path. Yet what started as inspiration soon turned into exhaustion. Warren's reputation for restlessness wasn't exaggerated, and Diane's need for emotional honesty clashed with his instinct to keep everything on the surface. By the time Reds was released in 1981, the cracks were already visible. Their creative partnership had been explosive but draining. Diane once hinted that working with Warren was like trying to keep up with a hurricane, exhilarating but impossible to survive for long. Still, she never spoke unkindly of him. In later interviews, she described their connection as a beautiful mess, a phrase that captured both her affection and her fatigue. Warren, for his part, called her one of the few people who ever truly understood him, though whether he meant that as praise or confession, no one ever knew. As the years passed, their paths diverged sharply. Warren stepped back from acting, content to live in quiet domesticity with Annette Bening, while Diane continued working, reinventing herself in every decade. Their lives no longer ran parallel, but the echoes of what they'd shared lingered in every mention of Reds and every retrospective of their generation. Behind the polite smiles at award shows and tributes, there was an unspoken truth. They had once loved each other deeply, but their worlds had never truly fit together. And now, with Diane gone, the question hangs in the air: will Warren Beatty attend her funeral? The honest answer is probably not. Their affection endured, but distance became their language. For Warren, showing up might mean confronting not just her death, but his own history. The decades he spent chasing brilliance at the cost of peace. Friends close to him say he rarely attends public memorials anymore. He prefers to grieve in private, quietly, away from the cameras that once defined his life. If he stays away, it won't be out of disrespect. It will be out of reverence for what they were, and for the fragility of time itself. Theirs was a love that could not last, but also could not be forgotten. A bond forged in creativity, tested by ego, and ultimately undone by the very intensity that made it legendary. When Warren Beatty reads her name in the obituaries, when he sees the old photographs of them on the Red set, laughing between takes, he will remember. He will remember the woman who matched him wit for wit, who refused to disappear into his shadow, and who reminded him that love at its best is both muse and mirror. So when the world gathers to say goodbye to Diane Keaton, Warren's absence will speak quietly of something deeper than grief, a respect so profound it can only be kept at a distance. Number 4. Bette Midler. On the surface, Diane Keaton and Bette Midler could not have been more different. Diane, the soft-spoken romantic wrapped in turtlenecks and nostalgia. Bette, the brash hurricane of laughter, who filled every room she entered. Yet, in the 1990s, when they appeared together in the First Wives Club, something remarkable happened. Three women, Keaton, Midler, and Goldie Hawn, took a script about heartbreak and revenge and turned it into a generational anthem. The film became a rallying cry for women who had been cast aside, a story that blended comedy with quiet rebellion. Their chemistry was electric, their timing flawless. To audiences, they looked like lifelong friends who had survived the same storm. Behind the scenes, however, the energy was far more complicated. All three women were stars in their own right, each used to being the center of attention. Bette's boldness sometimes clashed with Diane's reserve. While Diane approached the set with quiet precision, Bette thrived on chaos and improvisation. Crew members later recalled that their creative tension made the film better, every scene sharper, every moment more alive, but also left unspoken friction once the cameras stopped rolling. Diane admired Bette's fearlessness, her refusal to play small, yet she often found her overwhelming. Bet, on the other hand, respected Diane's subtlety but occasionally mistook it for aloofness. They were two artists who understood each other's brilliance, but were never fully comfortable in each other's company. After the First Wives Club, their paths rarely crossed again. Both went on to long, successful careers, and though they spoke kindly of each other in public, insiders knew there was distance, not hostility, just an absence of warmth. Over the years, talk of a First Wives Club sequel surfaced more than once. Bet was enthusiastic. Diane hesitated. She wasn't interested in chasing nostalgia. For her, that chapter had closed, and reopening it felt like rewriting history. Some say that difference quietly ended any chance of a real reunion. Others believe there was more beneath the surface, an emotional divide that grew as each woman aged into her own legacy. Bette Midler's world is loud, theatrical, filled with glitter and show tunes. Diane Keaton's is quieter, defined by family, photography, and solitude. Their lives became parallel stories rather than shared ones. They would occasionally exchange compliments in interviews, but never the kind that led to renewed friendship. Hollywood friendships, after all, are like movie sets built fast, burned bright, and often left standing empty once the credits roll. Now, with Diane gone, Bette faces the kind of goodbye she never quite prepared for. Friends of both women say Bette was genuinely shaken by the news, yet whether she'll attend the funeral remains uncertain. Some believe she'll stay away out of respect for privacy. Others think she'll avoid the cameras altogether. She's always been wary of the way grief can be turned into spectacle. If she doesn't appear, her absence won't be from bitterness. It will be from understanding. Theirs was never a friendship meant for constant contact. It was one of creative combustion, two personalities that met at precisely the right time to create something unforgettable, then drifted apart as life demanded. When the service begins and the tributes pour in, someone will no doubt mention the First Wives Club. That iconic final scene where three women danced through their freedom singing "You Don't Own Me." And somewhere quietly, Bette Midler will be remembering that moment. Remembering Diane's shy smile beside her, the laughter they shared between takes, and the strange alchemy that turned tension into triumph. She may not walk into the chapel, but her heart will already be there, still singing the song they made immortal. Number 5. Meryl Streep. When people think of Diane Keaton and Meryl Streep, they often picture two different kinds of greatness. Diane, the improvisational dreamer, who made imperfection feel honest. Meryl, the disciplined chameleon who could transform into anyone with surgical precision. For decades they existed like twin constellations, separate, luminous, occasionally crossing paths in the same sky. Their only major collaboration came early, in 1978, with Manhattan. It was Woody Allen's film, but the scenes between Diane and Meryl carried an energy that no one forgot. They were both still young, still defining themselves, yet their contrasts were already clear. Meryl's control met Diane's spontaneity, and sparks of admiration and quiet rivalry began to show. In later years, both women spoke respectfully of each other, but always at a distance. They were never enemies, only opposites. Each represented what the other could never quite be. In truth, Hollywood only has room for so many icons at once. As the 80s and 90s unfolded, the media loved to pit them against each other. Streep, the method actor's method actor, versus Keaton, the free spirit who refused to plan a scene twice. Critics drew comparisons neither woman asked for, dissecting every nuance. Meryl's polish, Diane's chaos. Meryl's gravitas, Diane's laughter. To outsiders it seemed harmless, but to two women carving their legacies in an industry that worshipped men, those comparisons could sting. Diane once joked that she could never be Meryl because she didn't have the discipline. Meryl, for her part, called Diane fearless, a compliment that sounded genuine, but also faintly distant. They respected each other's art, yet they rarely inhabited the same circle. Diane thrived on unpredictability, while Meryl built her life around structure and balance. One photographed crumbling architecture and adopted children. The other raised a family in Connecticut and memorized scripts with mathematical precision. As both grew older, they found themselves symbols of two different Hollywood eras. Meryl represented the craft, studied, eternal, untouchable. Diane represented the heart, raw, whimsical, endlessly human. They were never feuding, but they were never close either. At industry events, their smiles carried affection and restraint, the warmth of colleagues who understood each other's burden, but preferred not to share it. In her later years, Diane admired Meryl from afar. She once said she envied her stillness, her composure. Meryl, too, often spoke of Diane as one of the few actresses who made truth look accidental. But privately, friends said there was always a trace of unease, not envy exactly, but the recognition that they had been measured against each other for so long that closeness had become impossible. When the news of Diane Keaton's passing broke, Meryl released a brief statement: she was one of a kind. The movies were better because she was here, simple, restrained, dignified, exactly what one would expect. Yet behind that statement lies a shared history of decades spent orbiting each other without ever colliding. So when the time comes for Diane's funeral, it's likely that Meryl Streep won't be there in person, not out of coldness, but out of privacy. She's never been one for public mourning. Those who know her best say she grieves quietly, writing letters, sending flowers, avoiding cameras, and perhaps that's fitting, because her absence won't speak of distance, it will speak of respect. Meryl Streep understood Diane Keaton better than most, that fame is fleeting, art is forever, and the truest goodbyes are rarely spoken aloud. Somewhere in her Connecticut home, surrounded by scripts and silence, she'll light a candle, whisper a line from Annie Hall, and smile at the thought of a woman who refused to play by anyone's script but her own. And that will be her goodbye. In the end, Diane Keaton's story isn't defined by who attends her funeral. It's defined by the lives she changed, the laughter she gave, and the quiet courage she carried into every room. The absences will be noticed, of course. Woody Allen, Al Pacino, Warren Beatty, Bette Midler, Meryl Streep, names that shaped her journey, loved her in their own ways, and drifted from her for reasons time will never fully explain. But that's what made Diane's life so extraordinary. She loved without fear, forgave without always being forgiven, and never stopped believing that imperfection was where the truth lived. Her legacy is larger than any goodbye. It's in the frames of Annie Hall, the final smile of Something's Gotta Give, the echo of a woman who taught the world that being yourself, fully, awkwardly, beautifully, was enough. So when the cameras fade and Hollywood moves on, Diane Keaton's laughter will remain, echoing across the years like sunlight in an empty room. Because the truest measure of a life isn't who stands at your funeral, it's who still feels your presence long after you're gone. For more emotional stories, check out this video.